This episode about the Kugelblitz was made possible by the free-to-play military vehicle combat online game War Thunder, which I enjoyed a bit too much, as you can see on the screenshot. And if you want to get a shot at me, use the link in the description for a free premium vehicle and a 3-day premium account, but more on this later. Since there is no complete surviving Kugelblitz left, War Thunder provided various in-game footage as an alternative. First off, about the origin of the Kugelblitz. While in the early war Germany had often the air superiority, this had changed dramatically by 1943 and 1944. There had been several developments of self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, although most of these lacked firepower by 1944 standards and/or armor protection for the crew. In the beginning of 1944, requirements for a new Flakpanzer design were defined as follows. Revolving, fully armored turret with a crew of 3 or 4 men. Effective range of 2000 meters against all kinds of targets. At least twin guns. Sufficient ammunition. Height of the vehicle below 3 meters. Simple turret open to the top with free view for the commander, enough space and expelling of powder fumes. Use of standard top carriages off the flak. Simple turret traverse to reduce weight. As you probably have noticed, the Kugelblitz does not fulfill the criteria of a simple and open turret. Additionally, the other 2 Flakpanzers on the Panzer IV chassis, the Wirbelwind and Ostwind, fulfilled this criterion, although the Ostwind only had a single gun. So what is the origin of the enclosed turret? Well, here it gets a bit fuzzy. According to Jentz and Doyle, there was a meeting in January 1944 that led to a proposal. As a further interim solution, quickly strive to mount the 3 cm Doppelflak, Grün or Rheinmetall, in a U-boat turm on a Panzer IV. In planning the necessary guns and turrets for the Flakpanzer, keep in consideration that the number to be produced for the U-boat can't be reduced under any circumstances. This resulted in an investigation on the installation of a U-boat turret on a Panzer IV. The conclusion was that the difference were too substantial. As such, the idea was dropped to adapt such a turret. Yet, apparently the development of a turret with a twin centimeter gun was continued, since at the end of May 1944 documents on such a turret were presented, which led to an order for 300 modified superstructures of the Panzer IV to be able to fit the turret. A pre-production schedule from September 1944 laid out that the first 2 should be finished in October 1944, followed by 3 in November. Although it seems that this plan was not fulfilled, more on this in the production section. Still, the introduction was on 9 October 1944 with the following information. This, like the Flakpanzer, is to take over the protection of the Panzer units against Tiefflieger, low-flying aircraft. The main armament is 2 belt-fed 3 cm Maschinenkanonen 103, that are aimed by 2 Schwebelkreisvisiere, hover cycle sights, and 2 telescopic ZF-4, which were basically gun sights. Now, as so often with German vehicle names, the question is of course, did the Germans ever call this vehicle Kugelblitz, meaning ball lightning in English? Well, in this case and also with the Königstiger I can say yes, although whereas with the Königstiger I'm not sure if the Germans invented the name, with Kugelblitz, due to its almost complete absence from the battlefield, I'm very certain that they invented the name. The name shows up in various production documents from 1944 and 1945 that are photographed in the German military archives, where it is generally called just Kugelblitz, but also at least once in the November 1944 document also Kugelblitz IV. Furthermore, in the nuts and bolt issue on the Flakpanzer IV, there is a reprint of a proposal for an armored anti-aircraft company that repeatedly uses the word Kugelblitz as well. Generally, there are many names of German vehicles. The technically and most official name I found for this vehicle is leichter Flakpanzer IV mit 3 cm Maschinenkanone 103 als Zwillingswaffe. Light anti-aircraft cannon tank 4 with 3 cm machine cannon 103 as twin weapon. This was mentioned by Doyle and Jentz as the name for the introduction in October 1944. Let us take a closer look at the turret design, because this is the first completely enclosed German anti-aircraft turret. Although at first the turret seems rather small, this is a bit misleading. The Panzer IV chassis actually was fitted with a Tiger I turret ring. As such, the hatches for the driver and radio operator also had to be rearranged on the Panzer IV chassis. The main difference to previous designs was that this time the whole turret with the crew was elevated and not just the gun, as you can see here. Note that the turret was not sealed, so it was not water or airtight. The latter probably was less of an issue, considering that for the Flakpanzer requirement it was specifically outlet and an open top was required for ventilation. Additionally, the Kugelblitz turret had openings for ventilation. Furthermore, according to one source, a surviving prototype turret had containers for 3 emergency breathers included, which seems to suggest that there were at least concerns about a limited amount of ventilation. Of course, this might have been only an issue for the prototype version, although unlikely. This brings us to the crew. The crew consists of 5 men. First, the turret. It had a crew of 3 men, the Richtschütze 1 and 2, so Gunner 1 and 2. Gunner 1 was responsible for the elevation and firing according to a reprinted wartime document, whereas Gunner 2 was responsible for the horizontal traverse. One gunner was located on each side of the turret, whereas the commander was seated in the center of the turret. Note that the post-war source notes that the commander was responsible for firing using foot pedals, referring to photos of what seems to be a prototype turret. So I'm not certain who actually pressed or stomped the fire button. Maybe both could fire. The other 2 crew members were located in the hull, namely the driver and radio man, who was also the hull machine gunner. Speaking of firing, let us take a look at firepower. Now, as you might know, the 30mm Mk103 was actually a Luftwaffe weapon, which was called Flak 103/38 in army service. It is not without irony that this gun ended up as an anti-aircraft gun, since it was originally mainly intended as an aircraft gun to fight ground targets. It was also tested to be used in the Messerschmitt 262 against aircraft, but tests indicated that 4 Mk108 performed better than 2 Mk103 for that purpose. Hence, for this gun there could be at least 2 ammo types, high explosive and high velocity anti-tank ammunition. According to the tests by the Luftwaffe, the penetration for the latter was 110mm at a range of 300 meters. The rate of fire is different for the armor-piercing and high explosive ammunition. The armor-piercing at a rate of 380 shots per minute, so around 6.3 rounds per second, whereas the high explosive ammo was at 420 shots per minute, so 7 rounds per second. Sadly, I could find no information which ammunition was actually supplied to Kugelblitz. My sources only indicate 1200 rounds, without specifying the ammo type. Yet considering that the armor-piercing ammunition required tungsten and it was extremely rare, it is unlikely that armor-piercing ammunition was provided in significant numbers. Note that the gun and its components were enclosed in a metal box, but this box was not airtight. A short look at the armor. For the hull and superstructure this was very similar to the Panzer IV, although it is not known if the Panzer IV Ausführung H, J or a mixture of both hulls were used. The main difference though is that the top armor on the Kugelblitz was only 10mm for all components, whereas for the Panzer IV H and J it varied from 12 to 80mm. For the Kugelblitz the frontal armor of the outer turret guard was 30mm at 31 degrees, although it was also curved. Most parts of the turret had 18 to 20mm armor, except the top with 10mm and the rear with 30mm. In comparison, the Wirbel and Ostwind had an all-around 16mm armor protection for the turret. In terms of mobility, there is not much to note here. It had pretty much the same values as the Panzer IV. So top speed 38 km per hour, whereas the average road speed was around 25 km per hour and cross country 20 km per hour. Range on the road was 200 km and 130 in cross country. Next is production, or the lack thereof. Initial production should have started first in September 1944 and then in October 1944, whereas the serial production was scheduled for January 1945. The question is how many were actually completed. Official production records from 11th April 1944 note that 2 were built in February 1945, yet none in March 1945. Of course, this number does not include the prototype or prototypes. Jentz and Doyle state that 1 was displayed in October 1944. They note According to Ingenieur Ebel of Daimler-Benz, only 3 Kugelblitz were ever fully assembled, as important components were made by the Deutsche Eisenwerke, which was captured by the Allies just as serious production was about to start. Of course, it is not clear if these 3 also include prototypes or not. If we look at the surviving fragments, it seems that at least 3 to 4 turrets were in a state that was worth capturing for examination or even fully operational. In 1999, the German Military History Museum of the Bundeswehr in Dresden recovered the turret of a once operational Kugelblitz that was destroyed in 1945 by elements of the 4th US Armored Division. The British had at least 1 turret, which was later returned to the Bundeswehr. This turret seems from photos to be in a good condition, although I don't know how much of it was restored by the British and/or Germans. There is also a photo that shows a Kugelblitz turret likely at the air but in proving ground in the United States. Although one homepage notes that this was actually later sent to the British, as such it likely was the one returned to Germany. Sadly, I can't confirm nor deny this. Finally, the Soviets also got their hands on a Kugelblitz according to their reports. A short article was published in the Tank Industry Herald in 1945. Among various correct technical details and an error about the maximum elevation, it also noted that only 3 prototypes were built. As such, it seems that at least 1 Kugelblitz was operational, the one that was destroyed in combat. Maybe the Soviets also captured a working model. Furthermore, Tank Encyclopedia has photographic evidence of a Kugelblitz hull in Berlin. The problem is it is missing its turret. The distinct superstructure shape makes it apparent that it was a Kugelblitz hull according to Doyle. Yet from the photo one can tell if it ever mounted a turret or not. Probably the most interesting aspect I discovered when looking at my documents from the German military archives was the plan of Flakpanzer production for 1945, because at first it seems that the Kugelblitz was a dead end. The document is dated 1st November 1944 and contains reference values for manufacturing companies for tanks. There are 3 Flakpanzer listed: Flakpanzer IV, Kugelblitz IV and Flakpanzer 38 Diesel. For the Flakpanzer IV, the last production run was for January 1945 with 10 units. Meanwhile, for the Kugelblitz IV, the last run was scheduled for May 1944 with 15 units. Whereas the Flakpanzer 38 Diesel had its first run for March 1945 with 5 units and then should have a monthly output of 100 units from August 1945 onward. So what was the Flakpanzer 38 Diesel? Hahn notes that the new Kugelblitz turret was intended to be used with the chassis of the Jagdpanzer 38, generally called the Hetzer. Similarly, Terlisten and Duske note, because the production of the chassis for the Panzer IV and IV would end in summer of 1945, further research for a Kugelblitz II were undertaken on the chassis of the Panzer 38D. The turret itself underwent several changes too. This would also explain why the document uses Kugelblitz IV to clearly indicate the chassis and prevent further confusion. Additionally, the turret rework makes a lot of sense considering that the Tiger I turret ring was required and they barely fit into the Panzer IV chassis. The Hetzer chassis would likely not have been enough. So at first one might think the Kugelblitz was a dead end, yet actually just the chassis was a dead end. Because at the end of the war the Germans focused on only a handful of tank chassis, and the Panzer IV chassis was not among them, whereas the Panzer 38 chassis was. As you can guess, in terms of operational history there is not much known. The only reported combat seems to be the 1st of April 1945 at Spartanberg in Thuringia, where the Kugelblitz was destroyed by elements of the 4th US Armored Division. The turret was later recovered. It contains at least 1 penetration, and considering how it was found and the still attached fragments of the hull, it likely was ripped out by an explosion. As mentioned, there is also photographic evidence for a Kugelblitz hull in Berlin by the Soviets, yet not much more. It likely was an operational Kugelblitz. To summarize, overall, the documentation and available information on the Kugelblitz is very limited. While at first it seems like a revolutionary design, it should not be forgotten that the British also had the Crusader AA Mark II tank with a fully enclosed turret during the Second World War. Generally, the question needs to be asked if an enclosed turret was more useful than an open turret of the Wirbelwind and Ostwind. Particularly since post-war designs like the US M42 Duster and the Soviet ZSU-57-2 only had partially enclosed turrets. The reason for these decisions were likely influenced by doctrine, technological limitations and/or other factors. Of course, it is interesting that the Germans in the 1960s developed their new Flakpanzer, the Gepard, and in the end they opted again for an enclosed turret, but so did the Soviets with the ZSU-23-4 Shilka, both of which used onboard radars, whereas the M42 and ZSU-57-2 at least initially did not. Big thank you here to War Thunder for sponsoring this episode and providing in-game footage of the Kugelblitz currently modeled in the game. War Thunder is free to play on PC, Xbox Series, PlayStation 5 and the previous console generation. Simply download and play. It is fully cross-platform, so PC players can shoot down console players and the other way. War Thunder models in general aim to be visually as historically accurate as possible. One of the features I like most about War Thunder is that it has a game mode where air forces and ground forces fight in the same battles. So you can actually use your Mk103 against tanks from not only the Kugelblitz but also from aircraft as well. And since they added ships a while ago, you can also try to dive bomb or torpedo ships as well. Additionally, there are various game modes that allow newcomers to the genre to learn the basics, whereas veterans can play harder game modes from the get-go. Furthermore, in total there are more than 2000 vehicle models available to play with. And if you want to have a shot at me or with me, be sure to use the link in the description to get a free premium vehicle. Thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script and Ralf Ratz and Christoph Bergs for helping out with sources and information. As always, sources are listed in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.